Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Off the Air, our WFUV sports pod, where we catch up with some of the great WFUV alumni. Now, today we are joined by a very special guest, someone who I've known for a very long time. He's currently celebrating 25 years for his sports public relations firm, Cirillo World. He was previously the senior vice president at Madison Square Garden. He was the VP of public relations for the New York Knicks. He was the PR director at Yonkers Raceway, served as a production assistant at Major League Baseball Productions, former Vin Scully Award winner, a Fordham graduate of 1978. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only John Cirillo. John, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to talk to me and Mike.
Well, listen, for me, it's always a thrill and an honor to be on with the WFUV broadcasters. I feel confident that I'll be saying, I knew those guys went, so good luck to you guys.
No, we appreciate it. Now, you've said that you can say that about a number of guys, but I do want to start. You grew up in Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn, which is also the home of the indomitable Vince Lombardi. And I'm sure he played a big role in you coming to Fordham, but what's it like to be from the same area as him? And I guess what sort of respect did you have for him, especially when you came to Fordham?
You know, even as kids in the first and second grades, Vince Lombardi's dad used to go to mass every day. And sometimes he would go to, the student mass and everybody be whispering, there's Vince Lombardi's father. So there was a great excitement about, being from the same town and the same church as he was.
John, when you look at what made you go to Fordham, what was the main reason why you came to this university?
Well, it was WFUV radio. I had a conversation with Bill Mazer, who was one of the top sports anchors at Channel 5 in those days when I was deciding on a college, and I had it narrowed down to Syracuse, NYU, and Fordham. And I called him out of the blue, and he was so kind. I spent like 20 minutes on the phone. Here's a high school kid calling a big-time broadcaster, and he was so gracious. I'll never forget the conversation. It ended with, go to a school that you could get the reps, get the airtime, get the play-by-play, get the hosting down. And I picked Fordham. In the end, I think it was because the line, Vince Scully went to Fordham. I'm sure you guys making your decision with guys like Mike Breen and Michael Kay and, all the greats that have come out of Fordham since then. But that's how I made the decision. And, I'll never regret it.
So you mentioned John Vin Scully, of course, one of the main reasons why you came to Fordham. What's it almost like thinking that this guy walked these halls, you received the Vince Scully Award, almost like following in his footsteps?
I have to correct you that the Scully Award goes to broadcasters. And I've been involved with the Scully Award for all 10 or 11 years as the public relations guy for WFUV. And, I'll tell you a great story about Mr. Scully. And I worked with him on all the awards in terms of setting interviews up with the radio stations like ESPN and Michael Kay. But in the first year, he and Charles Osgood, received the awards that were named for them. And we were up on about a 3-foot riser, to have the photos taken. And when we were done with the pictures, Mr. Osgood and Mr. Scully looked at each other and said, how are we going to get down from here? And I spread my arms out and gave each of the gentlemen an arm. And I said, gentlemen, it would be my pleasure. And I escorted them off the stage. So that's a great memory of Mr. Scully. And Vin also was the commencement speaker in 2000. And at that time, I was brought on by Fordham Athletics to be the, work as a PR consultant. And I worked closely with Vin on all the interviews. We had everyone from, the New York Times to the Daily News and the Post, and a lot of TV cameras there. And, he gave such a speech that even talked about that we have to, the world is kind of spinning out of control, and we have to take a pause from all the contraptions and, internet and all of those things. And he really was like a harbinger of, 20 years later, we see how, social media has kind of taken over our lives. But he's a brilliant guy, and, and I think in most of our minds, the greatest baseball broadcaster that has ever lived.
John, when you think about your experiences at Fordham University, you called, Fordham men's basketball, especially that 1978 upset win over Georgetown, a ranked team at the time. What was it like calling that game, and maybe just calling Fordham basketball while you were here?
That was a game. It was an afternoon game. Georgetown had played the day before. They played another ranked team and won. I don't recall the team, but you're just hoping that the Rams would compete. You're not thinking about an upset. And after taking a lead early, we had a couple of terrific shooters, Tom Cavanaugh and Billy Lombardi. And Cavanaugh in particular, he was hitting these shots from 30 feet out. Like they would have been 3-pointers today. And it was just amazing. Obviously we had a pretty full gym because we were playing a great team like Georgetown. And I still have the tape. I have to get you guys some of the tapes that you would
Love
get
to hear it.
But I want to tell you a story about the first day at WFUV. We were on the third floor in a long corridor. It went from one end of the hall to the other. And I go in for an interview with Mike Welchewski, who is better known as King Wally, and he became the voice of the Knicks on the public address later. And there was a guy named Jerry Murphy. He wound up being the traveling secretary for the New York Yankees, and he was having a catch in the WFUV corridor, throwing like 80 miles an hour with another FUV staffer. And I'm just listening to the mitts pop and looking at these guys. And I'm saying, this is not what I expected. But, it was just a thrill to be at the station then. And, it always is to come back to Fordham, having taught there for 24 years and, getting to know so many of the broadcast elite during their younger student days.
John, you mentioned you're an adjunct professor here at Fordham. Obviously, I am a former student of your sports comm class, but you've had a number of incredible names: Ryan Rucco, Mike Yam, Tony Reale, Connell McShane, just to name a few. What's it like to watch them grow into what they've become now? And almost what role did you play in helping them get their professional careers started?
Yeah, you know what? I think teaching one course and having, really outstanding broadcasters like that. The only thing I would say is that I've always encouraged students that don't let anyone tell you that you can't do that. Just believe in yourself, chase your dreams. The old story of Mike Breen and Mike Kay talking in the cafeteria about, could you imagine if I became the voice of the Knicks? And Kay would respond to Breen, could you imagine if I became the voice of the Yankees? And look what's happened. Like, if people gave up, there wouldn't be the stars that have the great jobs now. Someone else would have them. So, take a chance, go for it. The guy that I would say that I helped the most was Spiro Ditas, because I'm going to tell one quick Spiro story. Father O'Hare was the president at the time, and Michael Kay calls Father O'Hare and he says, what's going on at Fordham at WFUV? You've hired professional DJs, but now you're hiring professional announcers. Who is this guy, Spiro Ditas? He's like a mercenary coming in to do the games. You need to train Fordham kids to become great broadcasters. And he's railing. And Father O'Hare says, Michael, just hold on. Spiro is a student. And that's how good Spiro was. And there was one point that I just said, Spiro, you know what? I would love to represent you. You know, I have a lot of contact in the industry, and got him his first on-air job doing an XFL sideline reports. That moved into Yes Network hiring him as the first backup that was 24 years old, backing up Ian Eagle, and then went on to get the Lakers job and NFL Network. And, you know, he actually did CBS NCAA his first or second year out of Fordham. So Spiro and I have remained really good friends, and we, you know, stay in touch, texting and complaining about different things that are going on in the world these days. But he's a great guy, and you know, it's a wonderful thing to watch people that you taught in the classroom, or you know, watched at WFUV as young men and women, and you know, to watch this success. So that's a very rewarding part of about being a professor.
Yeah, you talked about all the great WFUV alumni you've been able to teach and what it's like being a professor, but what was it specifically like being able to teach at the same school that you went to?
You know, I don't know that I would have accepted a opportunity to teach. You know, it was a busy time that I was actually senior VP at the Garden. No, I was the Knicks PR guy, and I was asked to speak at a young alumni event for Fordham recent graduates. And, you know, I spoke for about 15 minutes and did a long Q&A about getting into the industry. And when the session was over, a pepper gray-haired guy about 5'8" comes running up to the front of the room and said, "Do you teach? You must be a teacher. You have to teach." And it was Dr. Ron Jacobson, who's still at Fordham in various administrative roles. And he said, "Let's have lunch. We'll come up with 14-week class." And we did that. And the following, it was the day after Labor Day that I started in 1997 teaching at Fordham, and then had the, you know, 24-year run since then. So you know, teaching at your alma mater and starting at, you know, a relatively young age at the top of your game. Sometimes I've thought about, like, wouldn't it have been great if I just went into teaching and was a, you know, full-time professor? But you know, the relationships that you establish in the sports business and, you know, broadcasting and with sports writers then wouldn't be there. So, you know, I have no regrets.
So, John, you mentioned while you were getting into teaching, you were the Knicks PR guy. Now, one of your major accomplishments, more than a few, obviously, but one I want to highlight is you bringing boxing back to the Garden in 1995. What was that process like, getting that event back? Because it's just such a pull, especially at Madison Square Garden. How was that process? Who did you have to go through? Is there anything that I guess you would have done differently maybe in that time, or is there anything you can tell us about that?
Yeah, you know, it was I was at a Knick game sitting next to Dave Checketts, and we had gotten a directive from the new owners. ITT and Cablevision were co-owners. We need new business at the Garden. And it was actually after a John Starks dunk, and the crowd is going nuts. And I don't know why, but I started looking around at the banners that were hanging, and all the banners were Knicks and Rangers, retired numbers and championships. And I said, "Dave, you know what? There are no boxing banners up there. We don't have boxing." And the reality is that the Garden was like the face of boxing back in the day. I said, let's bring boxing back. There are only 5 major promoters. There are 10 boxers that, you know, people recognize. Let's go for it. And Dave asked me, well, who's going to do it? And I said, I would love to handle that. I was a big boxing fan at the time, and we navigated through it by going to HBO, which was the signature television network of boxing, identifying the fighters like Oscar De La Hoya and Roy Jones Jr. and Lennox Lewis, and in the span of 12 months, we had 6 fight nights. We were in the black for $1 million, which when you start a new business, even though you're Madison Square Garden and have the necessary funds to take a shot at it, it was a great achievement, and it really was what enabled me to start Cirillo World, because we were a boxing PR firm initially. A lot of the promoters don't have public relations people on staff, so they bring outsiders, outside companies to handle it. And people like Bob Arum, when he had Oscar De La Hoya in his heyday, and Lou DiBella when he announced his company, Cedric Kushner, Dino Duva. So we were handling, many major fights early in the company's history.
So yeah, you talked about Cirillo World, which you started in 1997, making the transition from Nick's PR to that. What was that like for you?
The hardest part of it was that, I was in no way burnt out, but I made a decision that I wanted to have a little more control over my life. And I remember some of the days at the Garden be 9 o'clock at night, and I'm, getting out of the office, and someone would, pull me on the side and say they wanted to talk about something. Say, look, I've been here since 9 o'clock this morning. Like, let's schedule a meeting tomorrow, So the walls got a little old, even though it was the Garden, and I knew I had some opportunities with boxing, and I was committed to do the teaching. So I made the decision, and going back to your question, I think having a small staff was the hardest thing about it. You weren't accustomed to faxing information to people. You had someone else to handle that, and it was me and an intern when I started, because I didn't want to make the investment of hiring a staff and not having the clients to pay the staff.
So,
and
John,
look, I think the other thing is that when you're part of a team like the Knicks, or part of a management team like Madison Square Garden, and now you have a firm and you're being brought in to publicize, you're kind of like a mercenary. People forget about you. You may not get invited to that Christmas party. Never feeling bad about it, but it was just a new lifestyle. I also thought, well, now I have complete control over my life, and you never have control over your life when you have clients that have specific needs that you want to make sure you fulfill them.
So, John, obviously the world of sports has changed, especially with all of the new technology. And you said faxing and things that I really, Mike and I were not familiar with at all. How has that helped your business, I guess, grow its outreach with the presence of social media, things getting out there and in the snap of a finger, of a drop of a hat? How has that helped the PR business, and how has that helped Cirillo World?
One of the things that I had polled about 20 PR people, this may have been 8 years ago, ages 25 through 60. And I asked, do you use social media to reach out to the media about a story that you have? And to a man and woman, they all said, absolutely not. Like, you don't use social media to do that. And that has changed. Like, you have direct messaging going on Facebook, and Instagram, and you could tag a writer or a broadcaster about a story that you're working on, and if they have a relationship with you, and maybe even if they don't, if they like the story that you're pitching, they're going to respond to that. Believe it or not, one of the greatest things about just the new way we approach life is using text messages to contact the media. Like that was totally unheard of. You would even though people had cell phones, you would just either call them up or send an email. And I've told this story to my class that Bruce Beck, one day we were just having a conversation, and he said, Tom Coughlin's the greatest. When I need to set up a time for an interview, I just send him a text message. And I thought to myself, well, if he's texting Tom Coughlin, then I might as well text him. And I just had a text conversation with Mike Vaccaro of the Post yesterday when Bob Lanier passed away. He was a great St. Bonaventure product who went on to greatness in the NBA, and we went back and forth. So I think that you're even texting family members happy birthday. So using text messages has been a great way to communicate.
So yeah, we talked about how you were the Knicks PR up until 1997, starting in 1984. How has the evolution of technology and social media changed the PR business from when you worked at the Knicks to now?
I think it used to be if a player made a mistake, it would be having in a conversation that he was having with the media person. Today, a player can tweet something out that is ridiculous or was the wrong way to handle something, and now you have to do the damage control on that social media piece that didn't exist 20 years ago.
So John, you also, going back to Mike's point with the mistakes that players can make in tweeting, there was a quote I remember in our class that you had from Pat Riley, and it was him asking you how long the story was going to be when there was a mess up. Now, one of those stories was when Charles Oakley attacked a media member during practice one day. What is it like dealing with something like that?
It was actually John Starks, and
Starks, yes.
He chased the writer who interviewed his mom and his grandmother, and he thought that was off limits, which it may have been off limits, but it was kind of mishandled by the PR person at the time. I had since gone on to the senior VP position at the Garden, but Riley would say, is it a one-day story or a two-day story? And we would always try to figure out a way to make it a one-day story.
You mentioned, that story from your time with the Knicks. What other stories can you think about? Is there a great experience you had while working at the Knicks? Those are some really good years. You had a finals run. You also had Bernard King, some really good years there. What's one really good experience you had as Knicks PR during those times?
I remember Kenny Walker. I'll tell you too. Kenny Walker was a great dunker, and he would do some things in practice that were phenomenal. So the Knicks players, I don't know exactly who they went to, but the NBA we got the NBA's attention. Kenny wasn't like a wild star like a Jordan or a Dominique, but he was invited to the Slam Dunk Championship. Well, in the interim, the week of the Slam Dunk, Kenny's dad passed away. And, he was going to pull out. And his mother said, you know what, your father would have wanted you to compete in this. Like, this is really an important opportunity in your life. Well, the long story short is that Kenny Walker won the Slam Dunk Championship and then had to race to the airport right after that to make his father's funeral. and it was just, it was larger than life. It was a story that, it would bring you to tears if you were there with Kenny rushing him to the airport after, the glowing victory in that slam dunk was just a special one. I was the PR guy. I was assigned to the first three-point shooting contest at the NBA All-Star game. So what the league would do, Brian McIntyre, great PR guy, he would assign each person an event. You might get the Western All-Stars practice, or I got the slam dunk the first year. And we're in the locker room, and all the players are there except one guy. The locker's empty, and it's Larry Bird. And people will say, well, where's Bird? He walks in, totally planned this thing, and says to the other 6 participants, hey, ladies, who's going to finish second? And he had these guys, he had his opponents so psyched out. He drained every three. He won the first one like by unanimous decision. I think during the Riley years, just working with, in my mind, the greatest basketball coach in history, and a top 50 player like Patrick Ewing, that's an opportunity that not a lot of people have in their careers. So I'm grateful for that.
So you mentioned the 90s Knicks. There was another 90s cultural icon, the Chicago Bulls with Michael Jordan. Now, you were the PR guy for most of that Knicks 90s run, of course, and Michael Jordan essentially building a dynasty on the Knicks' head. Every time that the Bulls and company would come to town, what was the planning for the PR? How did you guys handle the mob of just people that were looking, especially with Jordan in town, just trying to get to him? How did you guys handle any of that?
Yeah, I think the damage control stuff is much more overwhelming than having to accommodate, the media. You just try to do your best to, give the elite media like a Dave Anderson, who was a columnist with the Times, the best seats that you can. There's an upper press box at the Garden, so it was never an issue of how many seats you had. It was an issue of who's going to sit where. Jordan was amazing. When I used to put the seating cards down, maybe 5 o'clock for an 8 o'clock game, he was always the first player there. He would take a cab from the hotel and, shoot 3-pointers with the ball boy, shoot free throws with the ball boy. So I always say that, and the great players are all like that. No one's a natural. They become a natural because of their hard work. And that was Jordan. Jordan was, I know how great LeBron is and how great Kobe was. I don't think anybody's close to Jordan. And, that could be from the era that I'm coming from, but I think a lot of people might be in agreement with that too.
Taking it back a little in time to your years around college, near the end of your time at Fordham, what was it like around Sports Phone that one year you were there, and the energy around it really was a huge time in sports, the ability to, call that number and get those updates. What was that like the year you worked there?
Yeah. You have to remember that there were no all sports radio stations that were going 24 hours. There was no internet to check on a score. So the way, a lot of people say, well, gamblers use Sports Phone. They wanted to see how their team was doing. But, that wasn't only the case. The case was that crazy sports fans wanted to know that West Coast game that, the Dodgers may have been playing the Giants and it was a big game. And that was the way, New Yorkers and I guess in the other markets too got their information. So if big news broke, there were, very fast updates. I was actually went to the Preakness Stakes, second jewel of the Triple Crown, was able to get a credential through WFUV and Sports Phone. And I called Seattle Sloughs, obviously wasn't over the public address announcers booth or national television, but I called Seattle Sloughs Preakness win, sent it to Sports Phone, and they played it as the lead, story of the day when Slough won the Preakness second jewel of the Triple Crown. So
John,
yeah.
You bring up all of these moments. I mean, Michael mentioned it earlier with Fordham and Georgetown, with Tom Penders, Seattle Slough, and the horse racing. Of all of the sports broadcasting moments that you've had, which one was your favorite and why?
My favorite on WFUV. I would say, I'm going to give you three rankings. That Georgetown win, Fordham was in a much worse position than it is now in terms of the basketball program. Dick Stewart was named the head coach. He was let go, mid to late season. Tracy Trapuka took over for him. So that was like an upset for the ages. I would say number two was having the opportunity to call the first women's game on WFUV, and that was during an era that Ann Gregory was one of the great pioneers and the greatest player, in Fordham women's hoops history, and that's saying a lot. And Marianne Bellotti and Mary Hayes, there were some great players there, and Jim Donahue was my co-sports director. We made the decision we have to get, the women's games on. This was back in 1977. So it was pre Title IX. So we had a little bit of foresight there, young 20-year-olds. And then, the third would be the baseball team won the Met championship and then made it to, an NCAA regional playoff. And on that team included Freddie Opper, who was a big bopper, and he hit a home run onto the Rose Hill Gym that won a game in a walk-off. And right before the pitch, I said the Rams are hoping that Freddie will give it a ride, and he hit it onto the roof. So that was a big thrill. No, those guys. And the women's team, they've remained close friends. Bobby Cole was the ace reliever, and actually Jim O'Connell, who has passed away, but he was the SID for that year, and he formed a golf tournament called the Froggy Open, and that's a long story we'll save for another day. But that was like an annual reunion for the baseball team and the women's basketball team from the late 70s, and it's still going on.
And talking about some of those years after college, you worked at the Yonkers Raceway and WRTV Parlay, PR director there, and you worked under Tim Rooney of the Pittsburgh Steelers Rooney family. What was that like working under him? And then what are some of your experiences you had just working at that Yonkers Raceway?
Well, Tim Rooney was a great mentor. Having an opportunity to work under someone, someone that you would say, he gets it. And, we did things like golf outings at Wingfoot and, Yonkers trot parties at the Water Club. Tim and I had we were like pen pals during my Fordham days, and I would send him letters, and some of them were, almost too brash. And I wasn't really a brash kid, but they had John Dockery, who you guys may know was a former Steelers player that went into broadcasting, and he did mostly football. But because of the relationship, that Tim had with the Steelers, when Spencer Ross would miss a broadcast, he would bring John Dockery in. And I wrote a letter telling him that, I could do a better job than John Dockery, and you should have someone who's a racing expert. And I got a very polite letter like, kid, you know what? We really like John Dockery. But I'm not thinking, well, he was a Steeler. Anyway, fast forward, a few years later, I get the PR job. And when Spencer Ross, I love when the Jets had a road game, because Spencer would have to miss the Saturday show to get to the visiting city the day before. And I must have done about 20 shows. So, here I was, I would say, 24 years old, hosting on New York TV. And, thought maybe the broadcast career would continue, but then I got the opportunity with the Knicks. And, there was no turning back from that. And it was Yogi's fork in the road, and I took it and went into public relations. But, I'm thinking back that, getting to meet Art Rooney, the chief, the chairman of the Steelers, who would come to the big races. And, this was a guy that, he cared more about every man than some $1 million owner. After the press conferences, he would, and I was lucky enough to be close to the track photographer, Mike Cipriani, who knew Mr. Rooney well. And we would go visit with the electricians and the maintenance guys and the hot dog workers, and he'd be handing out cigars to everyone. And, this is the way to treat people. So, it was a very, very good lesson that no matter what your status, that, you should care about the guy changing the light bulbs, or, fixing the steam pipes as much as you should, the president of the company.
You mentioned the cigars, and of course your nickname in the PR world is Johnny Cigar PR. Is that where that came from, or is there a different story to that?
No. I did get to smoke a cigar or two with Mr. Rooney, but 20 years ago, you could smoke at a bar or restaurant. It was a different world before the laws changed. And there was a place called Elaine's on 2nd Avenue. And that was a place that, the scribes would go to, Bob Raceman, Steve Jacobson from Newsday. There'd be a slew of celebrity media, but also celebrities went there. Peter Falk went there. And I'll tell you Peter Falk's story in a second. But I would light up a cigar, not near a table where people were having dinner, but, off in the corner. And Raceman dubbed me Johnny Cigar. So when I opened the company, rather than have John at Cirillo World, I did Johnny Cigar PR, and that's been my email, for 25 years. But the Peter Falk story. Peter was a huge Knick fan, and for those unfamiliar, he played Columbo in that great old television series, and he'd come to a lot of Knick games, and he would kind of crawl around the corner near the wall and watch John McLeod or Riley doing their post-game interviews before there was a post-game press conference set up. And about 3 years after I left and started Cirillo World, I get a phone call. Pick up the phone, John Cirillo, and on the other end, the question is, I've been meaning to ask you for 3 years, why did Riley leave Starks in that game? And it was Peter Falk questioning Riley's move, for sticking with John Starks instead of bringing Rolando Blackman in that, dismal game that he had in the NBA Finals. So, I think the celebrities enjoyed the fact that I didn't treat them like celebrities, that I understood who they were. But, if we can't get you tickets for this game, we'll have to do the next game. Matt Dillon, who is one of Paul Dillon's sons, the great late golf coach at Fordham. I went to Paul's wake and caught up with Matt and Kevin Dillon, and we had a lot of great memories to talk about.
Yeah, you talked about Cirillo World, and you've worked with so many, big names, big, events, Gary Carter, Bob Costas. Was there a favorite person to work with at Cirillo World, or maybe a certain event you had to help manage?
We've been handling the Thurman Munson Award for about 22 years now. And it's a great charity. It's called AHRC New York City Foundation, which assists adults and kids with disabilities. And, being able to bring in great athletes, everyone from Mariano Rivera to Gleyber Torres, that I think that's my signature in the PR world has been, having a client that is a tremendous charity that helps people. It's hard to give favorites. I could spend another half an hour talking about them, but quickly, Ron Swoboda was my favorite Met growing up, and to get to know him and work on his book and a memorabilia project with him. And I called Rocky last week or 2 weeks ago. We just spent an hour on the phone talking about the state of baseball and the Mets and the Yankees. And, just listening to him, this guy is so smart. He goes to the Museum of Modern Art and, can talk politics with the best of them. Darryl Strawberry brought me in to handle his book. But when Costas launched his HBO show, many years at NBC, but he also had an HBO center stage type of show. And by the way, I feel like I'm on center stage with you guys. Bob brought me in to do some personal PR, and and that was great. But I would say, that, and maybe the Munson dinner, and then Tim Rooney brought us back when they opened Empire City Casino. So it was like a reunion. Having started my PR career at Yonkers, and then going back there. I'll tell you the Gary Carter story real quickly. I get a phone call the day they're going to announce the Hall of Fame selections for the year that Gary went in, and it was a guy named Mead Shasky who was like Gary's marketing guy, and he said, Gary asked me to call you. He wants you to be his PR guy if he gets in from today until the induction. And that's what happened. And I was on, a small bus with the only person besides Gary's family were me, Chesky, and I. And just to, be the fly on the wall with that group was a real special time for me too.
John, one more question. You obviously have been around Fordham, of course, forever. And you, again, teaching, it's kept you in the loop. The university has gone under a lot of changes between a new president coming in, new athletic director, new coaches here and there, and FUV has even evolved in its own right. Mm-hmm. What's it like for you to watch the growth of Fordham from when you first came to where the school is now?
Yeah, I'm going to start with Kyle Neptune. I thought that was a great pick by Eddie Cole. And when I got the email that he was stepping down, I'm saying, like, what in the world is going on? And then I connected the dots that Jay Wright was retiring. Like, what are the odds of Jay Wright retiring 1 year after Kyle Neptune came into Fordham? I worked with Frank McLaughlin. Frank was an absolutely outstanding AD. Even though, the basketball program has had ups and downs and mostly downs, Frank was great at, getting more money for head coaching positions. When Bob Hill came in, it sort of, even though it didn't turn out great at the end, it took Fordham's salary to a completely different level. When you look at, the hires like Stephanie Gately and others, her in particular, though, great judge of coaching and people. I've always felt that one of the biggest drawbacks for Fordham being in a conference like the Atlantic 10 was our facility. It's really hard to recruit. I was on a bus during my senior year, and a player named Paul Williams were driving up to the Allen Fieldhouse in Lawrence, Kansas, and he's shaking his head and saying, "That's a field house." Now, this is 1978. You're talking like 40 years ago. We have the same gym. So it's an obstacle. It looked like Kyle was on the right track in terms of, bringing the right players in, and, even back to Tom Pecora, who, got some really solid players. You're always hopeful. We're in a tough conference with not the greatest facility. Eddie Cole's one of the brightest guys I've ever dealt with on a college athletics level. So, knock on wood, hopefully we're in the right direction.
Well, John, we appreciate the time. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk with Michael and I. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to see you again soon.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.